Hello, my name's Steve Calis, and this is the Steve Calis Show. This episode is a special episode, I suppose, because I want to introduce new listeners to who we are, what we do, the adventures we've been on, the point of the podcast. Now, if you're listening to us for the first time because you heard us on BBC Radio Somerset, then much of what I hope I said, this is recorded before the interview, is true. We are a podcast that, in some sense, is an archive for some of the most incredible stories ever told to a microphone. And in this episode, we're going to give examples of those shows. We're going to show clips from those episodes so you get a sense of who we are. Sometimes it's just me and my good friend Kevin just talking a little bit of nonsense.
Would you rather have 100 duck-sized elephants or one elephant-sized duck? What's the biggest animal you could successfully sellotape to a lamppost?
This is a good question. Now, what I want to do is show you clips from episodes that I think summarize really nicely who we are and what we like to do here. This first clip is from our interview with a lady called Jan Canty. Now, this is a famous episode and one of our most popular because the story in a nutshell, the headline version, is Jan's husband in the 80s was killed and chopped up into pieces by his prostitute's pimp. He had been living a secret double life, and she had no idea. On the Monday, she was in a happy marriage, and on the Tuesday, she was $30,000 in debt in the 80s with a missing husband, and all this sort of stuff started to unravel. It's a staggering story. She's an incredible woman, and this is her story.
I got a phone call from a Detective Marlis Landeros, who asked me to come down to police headquarters. She took me up to floor 5, which was the homicide division, so that was another big giveaway, and brought me in to talk with Inspector Gil Hill. In a very few words, he said, we have reason to believe that your husband has been murdered. We don't have his body yet, which back then you needed because DNA wasn't what it is today. And you ought to go home and check your finances because he's been seen in the downtown area with this particular couple giving them hand over fist cash for the last 18 months. So I checked our finances and I come to find out not only am I broke, I'm $30,000 in debt. So in any case, that was it for that time. And then a week later after that, we were now 2 weeks missing. I got another call from Detective Landeros and asked me to come back down to the morgue, or down to the police station, the headquarters, where she met me at the elevators. And she said, we're going to I'm going to drive you over to the morgue because we have his body parts. And he'd been buried in a bog reserved for roadkill up in northern Michigan, owned by the University of Michigan Biologics Station. And they would deposit roadkill there to attract mosquitoes because the researchers were studying mosquitoes. The two people that were involved in the murder, John Carl Fry Sr. and Dawn Marie Spence, they were a pimp and a prostitute. He had dismembered my husband in Detroit and driven him up to northern Michigan to that biologic station. And neighbors had seen him put packages in the back of the trunk and take off at midnight in that horrible storm.
See what I mean? She's incredible. And because a couple of decades have passed, she's able to look back at the incident with a real clarity. And she's just excellent. Jan is a real fan favorite. Now, this next clip showcases a little bit of the other side of what we do, because we have been blessed with guests who have experienced some of the worst imaginable trauma that a human being can experience. Stuff that when you read it, you think, oh man, there's no way I could survive that. There's no coming back from that. And then somehow they did. So we will get to those stories. Jan's was one, and we've got 2 or 3 more that I'd like to share with you. But also sometimes we have a more light-hearted experience. Some emails are very hard to resist, and the email I received from a gentleman named Rocco Paolo was one such email. It said something along the lines of, "Hi Steve, I have been in regular email contact with Damu, the Sumerian god of agriculture, for years and years and years, and I've written a book about it and I want to talk about it." And that sort of thing excites me. Kevin, not so much. Kevin, I'm much more into that sort of thing than Kevin is. I love the stories. So here is Rocco Paulo talking about his experience with Damu, the Sumerian god of agriculture.
So what happened is was a coworker, and at one point we would always get together and just always talk about conspiracy theories, paranormal stuff. We were just always into that kind of stuff. Sometimes we agreed, other times we didn't. And eventually we went separate ways, still within the same company, but different departments. And probably about a year or so later, he reached out to me and he said, Rocco, that was a funny email you sent me. And I said, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. So I said, can you forward me the email? And I was drawn in. I was like, this is great stuff. And I asked my friend if he would continue the conversation with this person or if he's received other emails. So just to give you an idea, the email basically was telling my friend, stop it, stop it. The information that you have been providing or stating is incorrect. You don't know what you're talking about. And just went on and on and on about how everything that he was stating as in his mind real was in fact not true.
Oh, I see. So it was like an ethereal response to as you said, the conspiracy theories and stuff. Something was responding to that and saying, you're way off track. Yeah, that's
you're way off track. He did finally come forward and say, I'm Damu, and we found out that Damu was a Sumerian god. But I couldn't even find anything on Damu at the time. This was probably like 2004, 2005.
Right.
And but now if I look up Damu, it clearly states that Damu is a vegetation god from Sumerian. So I was like, okay, so whoever was doing this had an idea of, what name to use and how to go about it. So when we asked the question of like, well, why don't aliens just appear on, the White House's lawn or why don't they just make themselves present? And the answer is pretty much, if 6 to 8 billion people or more all focus negative energy, they all would basically die. And basically he came forward because of he considered that my friend was transmitting enough negative energy that it was affecting him to the point that, because I guess he was a teenager, this is my assumption, and he felt this like nagging, I guess, electric shock every once in a while from my friend. He just said, you know what? Just stop it. It's like, enough with your BS, and basically came forward. So that's basically the gist of how that all transpired. And then, like I said, the emails just kept going back and forth for several months. I started printing them. I left them at my desk. Other coworkers snooped around my desk, started looking at that, and they were all, wrapped in there too, saying, what is this? What's going on? What's with this email stuff? It's like, but it's very interesting information. So I knew it wasn't just me that was kind of like seeing something really interesting in there. It was pretty much everybody that got a taste of the emails.
I just want to say that whole episode with Rocco is wicked. He's had such an interesting experience, whether you believe it or not, and it's well worth tuning into. Now, the next clip is from an episode that was one of the most difficult we ever had to record. There was a period last year where for 2 or 3 months we were interviewing guests who had experienced just the most awful trauma. And I was reading their books, researching them, and then talking to them. After a few episodes of this, I had to stop doing the show for 6 weeks or nearly 2 months because I was so depressed and I was so afraid. Suddenly I was face to face with people who were talking about things that are your absolute worst nightmare, and if these things have happened to them. One such story that we recorded over a year ago and I still haven't quite been able to shake off is a story told to us by Becky Graff. Becky, her husband, and their 2 young daughters, just kids, went canyoning, which essentially is exploring a canyon. And sometimes these canyons get really, really close and you wonder, it's an adventure type thing. But what happens next, I could see in Becky's eyes that she had to relive this moment, every waking moment of her day. Talking about it even gets me emotional sometimes. It's just awful. And we spoke to Becky a year after this thing had happened, and it was still very raw for her. But she wanted to talk to us because she wanted to promote her book she'd written about it. But I'm just going to play you a clip from the episode and let Becky tell you what happened.
Sorry, I'm getting emotional already. We got married early on in 2008. We didn't know that we were ever going to be, if we were going to be able to have children or not. We had the blessing of our first miracle baby in 2016. We spent a lot of time, again, enjoying the outdoors where we live, hiking, camping. We do a lot of what's called canyoneering. I'm not sure how many of your listeners may be familiar with that. It's a hike that ends up in a slot canyon, which is like limestone or sandstone cliffs on either side. And sometimes it can get so narrow that you can actually touch either side. And the moment that we separated the trailhead and gave each other hugs goodbye, nothing would ever be the same. Not too long after that, what is being called the storm of the century rolled in. There was a storm cell that developed out of nowhere. The weather service actually had less than a 15-minute warning that it was even there, and it resulted in a flash flood. And that flash flood caught my daughters and I in a very narrow section of canyon, and there was no way out, and we were swept away. Myself and my daughters should not have survived. Unfortunately, they did not, and I did. And so since May 11th of 2020, it has been a very difficult and very intentional day-to-day focus for Tim and I to kind of figure out what the point of life is next.
I hope with these clips that you are getting some sense of what we do as a show. Sometimes me and Kevin just chat with each other, but sometimes, and most of the time, we talk to guests that have experienced rare things that if you hadn't heard them here, you might not have been able to learn from. Do you know what I mean? These people have just, they demonstrate how tough the human spirit is and how we can survive things that we ordinarily think would destroy us. We've been lucky on this show to talk to people like Pete Bennett. You might remember Pete from Big Brother. He won Big Brother years ago, and he was an interesting guest. A friend of the show is Daniel Johnson. Daniel was an X Factor runner-up, and has been a close friend of ours ever since we had him on. We've had an extraordinary range of guests, but perhaps none more extraordinary than our friend Russ Kellett. Russ Kellett reached out because he wanted to talk about his experience with UFOs and alien abductions. Russ claims to have been abducted by aliens 60 times, 60. And he also claims that he was a super soldier in an intergalactic war. The story is incredible. It is wild. So I'm not gonna tease you anymore. Here's Russ. Here's a small section from the episode, a small clip. Here's Russ talking about his experiences.
I'm coming home and coming down this road, which I knew, and I came across this tunnel.
Oh, right. So it was a tunnel you'd never seen before.
Never. And it was very eerie. The next thing, I was laid back in this like dentist seat, and there's these shadows, and these shadows got closer, and now there's like these 15-foot creatures, like human, bald. And I'm thinking to myself, sort of like, what the hell's going on?
So this is your first contact with them. This is your first contact with these beings.
Terrified.
Now, there are clips and episodes I've deliberately left out because I want you to go back and explore some of these things yourself. The full episodes of the clips we've shown but also episodes like when we interviewed Hollywood veteran Laura Caillouet. Now, she's worked with Leonardo DiCaprio, Woody Harrelson, Jamie Foxx. Actually, she's worked with everyone. She was in an episode of Friends. There's something she's been in that you've seen and enjoyed, and it was a pleasure to talk to her and get a sense of what Hollywood's really like, because, I mean, who knows better? She's honestly amazing. We spoke to famous comedian Mark Simmons, who's a really, really popular one-liner comedian. He told us some jokes, I told him some jokes, and he rated them out of 10. It was a really great episode. We spoke to Kevin Payne. Kevin Payne has been living with MS most of his adult life. His diagnosis came around the same time that his wife left him, his kids left him, his dog passed away, he got hit by lightning. He literally had maybe the worst day any human being has ever had, and has somehow not only built an amazing life for himself, but also jumps out of airplanes as a hobby, and that's despite his body being riddled with MS. We've spoken to the most, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, there is something to learn from what we're doing here. We've spoken to the most incredible people and heard just the most baffling stories. And if you're with us, that's all to come too. Me and Kevin want to become better fathers and better fiancés to our partners. We're on a journey to improve ourselves and learn a little bit more. And we really hope that you listening come along with us. If you have any suggestions for stuff you'd like to see or hear, then just please reach out. We love hearing from people online. Well, that's it from me. Our next episode will be out over the next week or so. And again, thank you so much for listening. Please consider hitting that follow button or leaving us a review wherever you're listening to this. It makes a world of difference, and hopefully we can make a good career out of this and spend all of our time speaking to the most interesting people on earth. Thank you.